Hello, strangers. It's Tuesday, and I have one true scary story for you. This one is story number 88. I'm a woman in my 40s, and if you knew my name, you'd pause and prepare yourself for some salacious detail. Because I spent a good chunk of my life with and married to somebody who did something very, very disturbing. Something infamously disturbing. I've tried to set the record straight on several occasions, wearing some uncomfortable pastel skirt suit, sitting primly as they ask accusatory questions like, how could I not know what was happening under the roof? I find it hard to put into words what happened without screaming them. But I come to you today to explain two things. How did it happen? And what happened after? How did it happen is easy. Rick and I started dating in junior high and never stopped. It just seemed natural and easy. At that age, you're trying to figure out who you are, and Rick knew who he was. I know that worried my mother. Not that she sensed anything off about him, just that she saw me slowly shedding things that were me for things that were we. I had been really into volunteering at the Haven Humane, but after Rick and I got together, I just didn't have as much time for the dogs that I loved. Things like that. I was too young and stupid to see that she was trying to take care of me, trying to look out for me. I launched into some "my parents don't understand me, I'm different" diatribe. But obviously, I remember it. And as the other photos on my wall were replaced, changing from me things to we things, well, how much of me was left in it? With the benefit of hindsight, I look back and think, did we go to that concert because we liked the same band? Or was it that he liked that band and I liked him? There was a lot to like about Rick. His manners, for one. Rick was very courtly. When we'd go out to restaurants, he was always extremely kind to whatever attendant, cashier, or waitstaff we encountered. He had this bit. They'd ask if he'd found everything he needed, and he'd pause, widen his eyes, and say, "Well, shoot, who can say? Have you?" He'd follow this with a good-natured chuckle. A couple of times I could see this look flash across their face. Nerves. But they'd see me stood next to him, and it would pass. I was proud that my husband was not only not a creep, but also not a screaming, "the customer is always right" member of the Karen species. After high school, I got a job as a receptionist in a dentist office. Rick took a job out in a plant a town away from where we grew up. He had to leave ungodly early in the morning to arrive in time for first whistle, but he made a lot, and we were able to afford a little house with it. A little house with a basement, which is unusual for Southern California, and he had a plan to finish that basement. Not that I saw much of it. After a few initial asking me down to take a look at what new struts he'd put in, I turned the doorknob and found that it was locked. See, Rick also was very particular. He had his habits, walking the property at night, installing floodlights. And when I asked him why he'd started to lock the basement door, he told me to get into a good habit for baby-proofing. We'd never discussed having a baby. It was one of the few times I felt like I snapped out of it and asked myself how much of this was me versus how much was what he wanted, of which he was presenting as what we wanted. A relationship is like a house that 2 or more people build. After a while, you can forget whose room it was or what you built alone, where you are in that house. In my mid-20s, the echo of my mom's voice, sounding more and more like mine all the time, began again with a close, false positive pregnancy test. I could hear my mom's voice. Where are you in all this? But you didn't come here to hear about all that. You came to hear about the event. On the morning of the event, I carpooled with another girl, one of the hygienists. She came to pick me up an hour or so after Rick had departed. Come to find out, Rick didn't go to work. He'd parked a street away, waiting to see her car drive by. I wasn't supposed to be home for hours, and without a car, I would be unlikely to make any surprise trips home. Rick had a plan, and he needed the time in the house without me to see it through. His next step was the local supermarket. In the interim, I came home early from the dentist's. The virus I'm sure everyone is aware of had taken our office down for a week, and we'd only gotten the word right after we arrived. My friend drove me home, and there I was, with an unplanned day off right in the middle of the week. I was both struck with a list of things to do, little things that I usually ignored until the weekend, and with that list, a sense of tiredness. The bed just looked so inviting, and I thought, hell with it. I got back in and went right back to sleep. Rick had gone to the supermarket, where he'd been making friends with one of the nameless cashiers. He came alongside her during a smoke break and offered her a different variety of inhalable delights if she came with him when her shift was over. And she did. Why not? She knew him. Rather, like all our friends, she knew he wasn't us. She was led to believe I was home too, would be there when they arrived, and that seemed safe enough to her. He'd brought her down to the basement. She'd been hit in the head, hard enough to stun her. Her hands and feet were tied, but her mouth wasn't gagged. I wasn't due home for hours, so there should have been no one to hear her. No one except Rick, and from some of those same articles, it's theorized that the sound of her voice, screaming, was a large part of what he wanted. So, when I came to, groggy and roused awake by a scream, his little plan all came apart. I came out of the bedroom, eyes bleary, heart pounding. I tried the basement door, and it was unlocked. I made it halfway down the stairs and saw the girl on the ratty chair, crying and screaming. Rick was hovering over her, but frozen like a deer in headlights at my arrival. His hands were clenched around her white polo shirt, yanked up like he meant to pull it over her head. But he stood stock still as we made eye contact. I took a step back, out of shock or need to fetch the phone, call the cops, I don't know, and he bolted. He threw his arms up to catch onto the window ledge, pull himself up and through the window and into our backyard. If it hadn't been broad daylight, those sensors would have set off the floodlight on him. He ran off, leaving me and this strange, scared girl staring at each other in the unfinished basement of our house. I think I began to understand that day that of that house we'd built together, Very little of it was me at all. I was somewhere in it, sure, but where? I didn't know. The cops said there was no evidence of any other girls brought down there. I asked that repeatedly. They found a lot of porn, so it appears he'd been placating his urges with fantasy until he just couldn't. When the cops asked me if I knew it was serious bondage and torture porn, I didn't. It's something good little Christian boys and girls aren't supposed to be looking at. People on TV make a lot of trigger events. Was my potential pregnancy the flashpoint when he decided if he was going to act on his sick urges, now or never? I never thought I'd say I was glad to have had that turn out to be a fluke. Thinking of bringing a child into that with him makes me nauseous. God, even the phrase, bringing a child into that. He'd planned to do the same. The cashier was only 14. Everybody knows the breathless story. They don't talk about the after. My after was gray. I lived on rails. I'd go to the store. Of course I'd go to the store. I was still a human and still needed to eat, and food had to be procured somehow. But it felt like I was watching a rerun on TV. It wasn't that I couldn't think of anything but him, playing some nightmare on a loop. It was that I refused to think at all. My brain just wouldn't produce any thoughts or images. All I saw was a list of events I'd check off throughout the day. Get up, shower, brush teeth, make breakfast. Don't look at the door to the basement, or you'll spend the next hour screaming into your hands. Drive to work. Work. Go home. Avoid looking at the basement door by all means necessary, or your dreams will be lit by your husband's wide, animal-in-flight eyes. Sleep. Dream. In your dream, you'll see the legs of your husband. He's in retreat mode, pulling himself through the squat window in the backyard, legs kicking. It reminds you of a frog's mouth from which fly legs kick, and you wake yourself up with your sobs. Repeat until death, probably. But one day I stopped for gas. It just so happened I needed something from the gas station. I can't even remember what it was, only that my mind on rails stubbornly wouldn't let me drive to the supermarket, as that was Saturday's task. The thought exhausted me. Gas station it was. The attendant wasn't one I knew or recognized. She asked me if I'd found everything I needed today. And without thinking, I replied, "Who can say? Have you?" Only when the words left my mouth did I realize what I'd just done. I'd parroted his little phrase. His little, "I'm not a threat. See me here with my little wife? I'm just a nice person. You don't need to worry about me. No, sir." Bullshit script was burned into my everyday conversation. My mouth felt like I'd gulped down a swallow of hot coals, ashy and burning. I saw the girl's face change. She asked me if I was all right. I was not all right. Right there in the gas station, it was like I was wearing Rick. It all hit me at once. I suddenly and clearly thought, I have no idea who I am or where I am. Very intensive therapy happened. The house sold, and I pocketed the money and left town. I drove north, along the same route my parents used to take me for summer trips. Something about that drive made me wake up. I could feel the warm air against my arm, ruffling the hair along the side of my head the way my hair would ruffle as a child. I stopped at a town with a funny name, one my dad used to announce in a big, grand voice, Tulare. He'd raise his fist like it was some sort of rallying cry. I took an exit ramp, pulled in front of a sparse little airfield that housed some static displays. I stepped out of my car, and I let the sun warm the sudden tears, drying them to salt tracks. I got a new job, a new apartment. I got new hobbies and friends. I got a dog. I named him Ralph, from my favorite show as a child who never knew Rick. Yet I don't think I'll ever fully extricate myself, excise him like the tumor he was. Occasionally, I'll catch one of his habits, and I'll suddenly, forcefully, undo whatever I did. Store the cups rim side down instead of up like he liked. See some memory imprint in the kitchen drawers of my apartment, and spend hours rearranging them. Even if his way was convenient, I can't be sure if it is or if it's just familiar. For me, familiar makes my skin crawl. I still go to my shrink. I told him I feared ever being able to shed the snake skin of my life with Rick. He told me I would, that I was just myself once, and I could be myself again. And I think he may be onto something. I was giving Rolf a scratch behind his honey-colored floppy ears, making his name tag jingle. I rotated the collar around to look at his name tag. My name is Rolf. If found, please return to. And it listed my name. I read my name, engraved there above my phone number, and for the first time in a long time, I thought, there you are. Well, I'm glad that this one didn't come in for Valentine's Day. Yikes. If I can give everyone out there a bit of vodka ant advice, if someone's love takes you away from things that you loved before, I would be high-key skeptical of their intentions. If someone ever told me I couldn't have dogs, I'd be telling that someone to lose my number. But that's just me, and I'd love to hear what your deal killers are down in the comments. Deal killers besides, don't be an actual attempted murderer, of course. If you'd like, you can like. If you have something to say, you can comment. If you want to see more of this every Tuesday and random days that are special, feel free to subscribe. And otherwise, just know I'm so happy you're here. Until next time, take care, strangers.